Hi, Tim.
Yes, hi there, Nico. How are you doing?
Very well. Tim, I was thinking about this week, everything that's happening in the news and everything related to racism. And we know that you worked in doing the apartheid in South Africa as a minister. And we'd like to know a bit about how you lived that situation and what was happening at the time.
Uh, yes, well, in the apartheid era, the church, I'll talk just about the Anglican church, was in a very difficult situation because on the one hand, the church was quite clear and tried to be a non-racist organization. But on the other hand, the church was embedded in a racist society. So, for example, because of the way apartheid worked, keeping black and white people and colored people and Indian people separate from each other in different areas, inevitably parishes were constituted by race. So I worked in white parishes initially because they were parishes in suburbs. And black priests worked in black parishes and colored priests in colored parishes and so on. So it was virtually impossible with the best will in the world to evade being, being part of the whole structural racism of apartheid South Africa. The critical point in South Africa came when in 1976, when the school children in Soweto, the large black township on the edges of Johannesburg, when the school children went into revolt because they had been instructed that they had to be taught in Afrikaans. And they went into revolt and their children were shot and killed indiscriminately by the police and so on and so forth. And Desmond Tutu wrote a letter, an open letter to the Prime Minister, as he was called then, John Vorster, in which he said, look, if you don't realize that the country has reached a critical turning point morally at this point, apart from anything else, then apartheid will be doomed very soon in a violent and horrible way. And of course, he was laughed at. But the amazing thing in South African history is that it was only 20 years later that, in fact, apartheid came to an end. That was 1976. So less than 20 years it took. But at that time, in 1976, apartheid was unassailable. The government had built a massive military presence and power. It had built roads to carry its military all around the country. It seemed quite unassailable. So in terms of my own sort of way I saw my own role, in 1986, when I became rector of a parish in a fairly affluent white suburb in Pretoria, Pretoria being the heart of Afrikaner nationalism, the seat of government, Desmond Tutu called for sanctions on South Africa, called on the world to put sanctions on South Africa. And I preached that white Christians should support that. And overnight, 50% of my parish walked out. And I got, vicious emails and, well, we didn't have emails in those days, letters, phone calls, anonymous phone calls, and so on and so forth. But I felt that, I remember at that time I was in a church where we shared a church with a Presbyterian, and the Presbyterian minister said to me, why do you do this? Why do you put yourself through this? Because the standard white Christian thing was politics and religion are separate. They don't have anything to do with each other, which is exactly what the government wanted the church to teach. And I said to him, well, either we play a game on Sundays for an hour, or what we say really matters for the world that we live in. And so therefore, I really don't see I have any kind of choice in pointing to this.
Well, that's incredible to hear, and that's such a brave stand, Tim. and I've read so much about Desmond Tutu, and he's one of my kind of big heroes. And you actually met him, didn't you? And you kind of worked with him. Would you like to share a bit about that?
Yes, well, in fact, I asked him to come and talk to my church because the church was in ferment. You know, some people stayed and they put sanctions on the church, so they withdrew their giving, and they were very aggressive and so on and so forth, very angry. So I asked Desmond Tutu, which was an awful cheek. It really was when I look back at it. But I went to his office and I asked him to come and talk to my church. And with unbelievable grace, because the man had just flown in from New York, and he arrived after me when I arrived at his office. I booked an appointment, and his flight was late and so on. You could see he was utterly and completely exhausted. And so I asked him if he would come, and you could see that he kind of, he thought, anyway, he said he would. So he came. And so he came and had supper with us first, and he brought Terry Waite, actually, at the time was the Archbishop's representative, and some members of his own family, and had supper with us, and then he came and talked to the church. And as I say, he faced the most incredible, the government could never put him in jail because he was too famous. Yeah. But they made his life and his wife's life an absolute misery. You know, they used to stop them by the side of the road, the police, and make his wife strip by the side of the road, right on the motorway. That kind of thing. I mean, they were really brutal. So he endured the most incredible persecution, but he was always safe from jail because he was just too well known, too highly regarded in the world.
And then, Tim, looking at sort of racism now in the world, and obviously what's happening in America, and probably happens a bit here as well, is what can we do, like here in Ashtead 2020, to kind of have a stand or help out? Because to be honest, I see it and I find it really frustrating. But other than praying, I feel like there's not much I can do. But maybe with your wisdom and your experience, you can share some things we can do to help.
Honestly, I don't know. It's difficult. Ashtead, the danger of Ashtead is that one tends to be rather removed from these things because it's such a monolithically white community, and monolithically quite well off. So you're not living cheek by jowl with poverty and the way that you were in South Africa, or meeting people of different racial groups as you were always doing in South Africa. So, the danger is one feels rather removed from it. So unless you are going to, be an activist and go into London and protest, as some people have done, outside the American embassy or whatever, then I think that probably prayer is probably the thing to do. I think racism is something we all have to guard against, because I think it's a very easy thing to participate in without even realizing that you are. So I think one has to keep oneself pure, if I can say that, by looking into oneself. One has to pray here in Ashtead, and if you are of an activist temperament, then do what you can. Write letters to a member of parliament or whatever. I'm really not sure. It's such a different situation. In South Africa, one was always confronted with it. We deliberately sought in the apartheid era, we twinned. We had white and black parishes which twinned. And I took a whole busload of my parishioners into a black township. It's the first time they'd ever been into a black township. They were utterly petrified because the fear was that the black township is dangerous, that you'll be murdered and killed. And it was brave of them to come, and they came. We had the most wonderful day because we were welcomed with such warmth and given such a wonderful trip, and it really opened people's eyes. And then, of course, I went and spent 7 years living in a black township because I just felt as a white South African priest, I could either just continue very comfortably to tread the boards of moving from one white parish to another. But if I was going to be a South African priest, then I needed to step out of my own comfort zone and go into a black parish. So we had 7 years, which again were absolutely wonderful years because we were received with such warmth, and we learned so much living in a different culture. It was a high point of my ministry, really.
Yeah, that seems like real, like incarnational ministry is actually living what you're preaching and actually taking that truth to your life. And what maybe from that experience, what year was it? Was it after sort of 94 or?
That we went to live in a township? Yes, it was in 1995. Yes, in fact, a friend of mine had gone before me. Now, he had gone to the same parish, actually, that I went into in 1992, I think. And he and his family had the most terrible time at the hands of the security police. We used to keep their children very often who were friends with my children because, you know, they were given such a terrible time. So we went in a much easier time when apartheid had been formally brought to an end. So we didn't have those problems at all.
Well, thanks, Tim. It's been really interesting to hear your story, and I think our challenge is to try and look inwardly, because sometimes we might not have racial biases, but we might have social class bias, and look at other people as if they aren't as important as us, or we feel that someone who's different can be threatening. And I think looking towards ourselves is a really important thing, and actually trying to be aware of that, and also, as you say, praying and being in some way activists. So thanks very much.
I think in some sense, racism in Britain takes a class consciousness form. Britain's an incredibly class-ridden society, I think. So yeah, class consciousness and class arrogance is a feature of life here, I think.